Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you over the fact that Big 12 is having its best year in college basketball history. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to a Locked On Big 12. Locked On Baylor crossover? I thought your team lost.
Great timing. Perfect
I'm Drake
timing.
Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. That's Cam Stewart, who is co-hosting today to keep him from being sad.
Gotta stay busy somehow, man.
We will start with the Big 12 having a historic run in March Madness right now. Is this the best year the conference has ever had? The answer is yes. And then transfer portal is open. And you know the Baylor Bears will go get the best transfer out there and the best freshman guard in America and still lose in the first weekend. Then we will go to West Virginia, who has no basketball coach. Still, if you hit subscribe, we both get to keep our jobs. Where we begin, this is March, and the Big 12 still has a 1 seed alive. Houston playing Purdue in the Sweet 16, while Baylor and Iowa State had disappointing rounds of 32. Schools like BYU and Texas Tech are marching on. This is it ties the record for Big 12 teams in the Sweet 16. 25% of this field remaining is from the Big 12. While a lot of people are arguing this is the worst March Madness possibly ever, it's madness that benefits this conference, especially when schools like BYU, who weren't supposed to be here in January, are now still alive.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to look back on. In January, it was like Baylor and BYU. Which of these teams is not going to make the tournament? Crazier still that they both made it and that BYU is much, much better than they were. But yeah, for all this talk of it being, a crap NCAA tournament so far, which I can kind of agree with. We want that 12 seed in there. We want those mid-major teams in there. And to not have that kind of stinks. And it's like historic. I mean, this is the stats. So 4 teams in the Sweet 16 of the Big 12. They haven't done that since 2002. It's like the first time since 2007 that no one's been lower than a 10 or 11 seed in the Sweet 16. So that stinks, but it is great for this conference, which was seen as kind of second fiddle all season long. Everyone talked about how great the SEC was and how, people hosting in our conference, JT Wistersill talking about, yeah, dude, the Big 12 or the SEC is this great. They should be having 14 teams in there. And they're the same people that aren't going to base, how many teams a conference should have in March by the March results, which I think is silly. And look here, we're still the teams that are remaining. We're the conference that's still winning. And the SEC, survives one with Florida yesterday. And they have a tough first round, including a couple being knocked out by Big 12 teams. So yeah, the SEC did not deserve to have 14 teams in there. And they might have deserved to be called the best conference this season. But I come back to this, Drake, and I know you've said this a lot too. It's like March has a bunch of randomness to it. And so a lot of programs don't like being judged based off March, but that's how we judge them. Like if you ask the casual college basketball fan right now, like who has the second most regular season wins in the last 5 years, a lot of people aren't going to say that it's Baylor because they go out in the second round every year. That's what we base these programs off of. That's what we base Blue Bloods off of, is who wins in March. And so, yeah, the SEC might have had the best year. That's a long way of saying this. The SEC might have had a better year than the Big 12 on paper, but the Big 12 teams are the ones that are still dancing. So that's all that's going to matter at the end of the day. And the Big 12 has a better chance than the SEC of putting a team in the Final Four and in the national championship game. So, yeah, and on the flip side, the ACC might look better down the line if Duke just wins the national championship.
Valid. Can I, and you being a born Duke fan, still have a rooting interest here in March Madness.
Retired.
The SEC has 7 teams in the Sweet 16. But at some level, this just becomes kind of an odds deal, a math equation, right? You put 15 teams, 16 teams, 14 teams into the big dance. You're going to, at the Power 5 level especially, you're going to have a very good chance to move on. What we have learned is now that NIL's become more prevalent, the transfer portal more prevalent. Guess who's going to win? Not Longwood, because their best 2 players, not FAU, because their best 3 players are all going to Duke or Texas Tech or Florida. The top 3 scorers from FAU when they made the Final Four are all still in college basketball and all on teams that are in the Sweet 16. That's the era of basketball we're in. So if you let in, I never argued that Auburn's not good. I never argued that Florida is not good, or Alabama or Tennessee. And it was just Oklahoma and Texas. We're throwing things against the wall to hope they stick out of the SEC, calling it the best conference in college basketball history, blowing it up your skirt. And now I just don't think we needed Oklahoma or Texas to be in this, or Mississippi State even. And yeah, okay, Arkansas, the 10 seeds there. You know who their head coach is? John Calipari, right? I don't care where John Wooden is coaching or where Jay Wright is coaching. When they go to the Sweet 16, no one's shocked. The SEC. Right. Completely overblown or overrated, and the Big 12 is experiencing with even schools like Arizona, Houston, and BYU who weren't here the joys of really good basketball.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of I think that's the best way to put it. Of like none of us were arguing that the SEC had a bad year, and none of us were arguing that Auburn wasn't the best team, or that Florida wasn't a 1 seed, or that Arkansas couldn't make some noise, or that Ole Miss wasn't good enough to make the Sweet 16. Like none of us were arguing that. It was what you were saying, Oklahoma, Texas, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt. Like you're like, man, I've seen teams like, because as Big 12 fans, we've seen teams like this in the last few years, not the least of which being West Virginia this year, that don't get the respect and don't get into the field. And then these teams get dumped out, or like Virginia getting in last year. It was like, oh, really? That's how we're going to do this. And they get dumped in the first round. So, yeah. And the point, I think the best point for the Big 12 too is the Arizonas and the BYUs. And all these people that were saying the SEC is the best conference ever this year, like how many of those could even tell you that those 2 schools are in the Big 12, Arizona and BYU? Not only do people are not familiar that they're in the conference, but when you think of this conference, you think of Kansas and Houston, right? As the 2 teams that are at the top. Kansas stinks, but Houston, being at the top, and then you're like, oh yeah, Arizona's there too. And they played all these teams. And BYU, now all of a sudden they're the darling pick again, like they were at the beginning of last year. It's like, we're still here. And we're still, I think the depth and breadth of this conference is still just as good as the SEC, if not better.
Even with Baylor having the
even with Kansas dragging us all down.
30 seconds here. In Kansas, this applies to them post-national championship as well. For Baylor, who was arguing it could be a blue blood with a couple of more Final Four or Elite 8 runs, can we A, put that to rest, B, should we be worried about Baylor moving forward in the Big 12, or have Arizona and BYU replaced them?
I still leave that window open because I still trust Scott Drew.
Okay.
But the way they've moved since the national championship is a decline. It's definitely a decline. I mean, because they won
the greatest regular season basketball team of all time, but you never win in March, right? So what's the trade-off there?
They get players drafted in the top 21 or 22, and they make top 3 seeds most years. But they're still in that if they do kind of a Musselman run, like what he had at Arkansas, which did not have, a national championship Final Four,
3 Sweet 16s.
Sweet 16s and Elite 8s. Then you're still thinking of them as like a top tier program because you remember the national championship and the Final Four and some good players that they had. But certainly right now they have not capitalized on it for sure. That's what happens when you lose in the first weekend every year.
Coming up, they can change that all next season, as can anyone in this conference with the transfer portal. It is open. Who will take advantage? This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Nissan. Why? Because I drive a Nissan Maxima. Right now, the new Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan with the all-new Nissan Armada. Each week, Locked On basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week to Nissan is the Arkansas Razorbacks. As a native of Valonia, Arkansas, I am not upset at all to tell you. They've accomplished all of their tournament run despite losing their first 5 SEC games, and Coach Cal's Hogs have fought their way to the Sweet 16. They even knocked off back-to-back national champion and Hall of Fame coach Rick Pitino en route to that Sweet 16. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer. That's what the Razorbacks have done here. It's clear that our team of the week is out here ready to conquer the road with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada with any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder. Go find your next big adventure at shopnissanusa.com. That is shopnissanusa.com. The transfer portal has opened in college basketball and has already become a point of contention in America with players who are in the Sweet 16 actively leaving. Now, Baylor last year and the year before that, picking up senior guards, or BYU or Arizona. We have seen Big 12 schools conquer the transfer portal. LJ Cryer, who is such a strong piece for the Houston Cougars, came from Baylor via the transfer portal. And with it being open now, the Big 12 can take advantage. Who are the teams on the radar to make the biggest splashes in the transfer portal? And even before we get there, Cam, is the portal going too far with guys who are in the Sweet 16 like Justin Pippen, Scottie Pippen's son, already jumping ship?
Yeah, I do hate the structure for the portal in both basketball and football, to be honest with you, as football does it during bowl season. I think there's a way to do that where you do it in basketball after the NCAA tournament. Like, in football, you're backed up against the start of a semester. In basketball, you're not. So I don't see any reason why we need to be doing that during the tournament. And we saw that a bunch last year with teams like not accepting invites to the NIT because they didn't know how many players they were going to have and what they were going to need to do recruiting wise. So I hate that personally. And in terms of Big 12 teams, I mean, maybe there's a reason you have me on here, Drake, because you can't look much farther than Baylor because of how much how much stock they've put into the transfer portal the last couple of years. And maybe as a direct result of that, how much you're going to need to replace again. Like, this was a disappointing season for Baylor as a team that started in the top 10. At Kansas, obviously preseason number 1, falling in the first round as a 7 seed. Like, those are two huge.
Hunter Dickinson, by the way, transfer portal.
Yes. I was going to say 2 huge disappointments that built a lot of their team and their hype this year around the transfer portal. Kansas did it with Dickinson came in the year before, but guys like Zeke Mayo and ones like that, you looked at the transfer portal haul from Kansas, even though they were coming off a down year, and you said that's the preseason number 1. You looked at the Baylor team that replaced 4 or 5 starters. They obviously brought in a couple real high impact freshmen and 2 all ACC guys from the transfer portal. They're number 8. And so that's how we're judging teams now, not based off what they did last year, but by who they brought in the transfer portal. So I obviously look at Baylor and Kansas as 2 big players in that. Iowa State, I find to be a really interesting one because they're not one that has really found their success in the transfer portal. They've done it the old-fashioned way. They don't have endless NIL pockets, but they've identified good, undervalued high school talent and have made them into good college basketball players. And the way this season ended wasn't great for Iowa State, but they looked like they could have been a Final Four team for, 75-80% of this season. Yeah. And so I'm wondering, do they feel they need a portal addition or 2 to get over the top? And if so, how are they looking at the portal? Baylor's become a player that can go out and get big time players from programs like Duke and Miami and in Georgetown and Arizona and places like that. But is Iowa State going to focus on some more mid-majors and still get development that way? Those are the teams that I'm looking at personally. But Baylor is obviously the team I know the best. They're going to have to dip into the portal hard, which they've done each of the last few years. And the results have not been what they should be.
Yeah. The team that I have circled over and over for most things in the Big 12 has been BYU. That's no surprise. They are number 1 right now. Reason being, it's why we talk about Kentucky in college basketball most years and Alabama in football. The best team is who you give the most coverage typically because that's who's hot. BYU in football and basketball combined have won the most games in the Big 12. Just their second year here after being a mid-major. Yeah. And now in the transfer portal, they have the owner of an NBA team and an NHL team, the same guy, helping give their NIL one of the craziest boosts in college basketball and even college football. Is BYU, and not to say this in a bad way, but they have an advantage that no one else in the Big 12 has right now when it comes to the portal and recruiting?
Probably, yeah. And we've already seen it, obviously, in the high school recruiting with the rumored numbers of what they're giving H.A. Debonsa, the number one recruit in the country, Brockton, Massachusetts native. But I kind of thought this earlier this year before Baylor played BYU in Provo and the Debonsa news was he had just committed. And so it was like, are we seeing a sleeping giant in BYU, specifically in basketball? But obviously this does pertain to football as well. Do you remember that rumor a few years ago about the Baylor Mafia, like the Baptist Mafia,
Yes.
that was controlling the underground world and getting Baylor all these great players and great coaches and everything? That's probably what's actually happening above ground at BYU, right? Like they've got some very famous alums. They've got a huge national, international fan base, and they've got some very powerful alums that can throw a ton of money in there. You know, the owner of the Jazz and the hockey club, Danny Ainge, throwing money into this thing. Now Utah is literally, they fired their coach because they're like, why can't we do something like BYU is doing? So I wouldn't call it an unfair advantage in terms of how it's laid out in college football and basketball these days, but they certainly have an advantage that even some of the big state schools don't have. Like they have essentially a region of the country. You know, it's not the most populated region of the country, but they have a region. They have a religion at their fingertips. And that leads to some very powerful people with some really deep pockets that want to see these athletic programs do well. So yeah, BYU's got a distinct advantage that not even the Kansases of this conference have.
Yeah. One piece of that, and to add to it, is BYU has figured out that the better you are in athletics, and this goes for any school, for Baylor, for BYU, for Texas Tech, the better you are, higher admission numbers, more t-shirt sales, your logo is more popular, people know who you are as a university, and when your university represents a faith like BYU and the LDS Church, that only grows the message, the mission that you are putting out there. So for BYU, winning ultimately puts that mission in front of more and more people. So the more money you put into it, it becomes a mission field. Athletics does. And so for BYU to understand that, it's very dangerous for the rest of the Big 12. And dangerous is not a bad word there. Dangerous as in, if you're Arizona, it's dangerous that BYU could take over that recruiting base, could take over college basketball, the Big 12 in football, because of their commitment moving forward. Coming up, West Virginia, speaking of commitment, can we get a coach to commit, an athletic director to commit? Can we get something here, someone? West Virginia still doesn't have a basketball coach. This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Today's show is brought to you by Supply House. As someone who just bought a house, Supply House has been huge. Getting the supplies you need from the site that makes it easy. Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Easy to use website with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands. You'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Do you need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support with industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Go to supplyhouse.com. Cameron Stewart, Big 12 Insider. West Virginia still doesn't have a head basketball coach. And there have been questions about Ren Baker as the athletic director. I don't think I love nor hate him. He reminds me of Chris Pesman at Houston, where I was like, yeah, okay, you had to fire Dana Holgerson, but you still have Kelvin Sampson. Like, there are some things going for you, other things aren't. Pesman gets fired. Ren Baker, Yeah, there's the Neil Brown deal. You had to fire Neil Brown. You had to navigate the Bob Huggins situation and then hire a basketball coach. And that basketball coach left. And now we don't have a guy. And here's the biggest problem I have with this. I know West Virginia's next basketball coach is not in the dance right now. The 16 schools there are all power conference schools. Their coaches are solidified. They're not going to West Virginia. So why don't we have an answer now that especially the transfer portal is open?
Yeah, so that's the biggest concern for me is that like you don't have that Cinderella that's dancing. You're not waiting out the tournament right now. And beyond that, I mean, there was a coach who had his announcement that he was going to another school before the first tournament game this year, Will Wade at McNeese, right?
Yes.
Like they already knew he was leaving before game one of the tournament. So at this point, like it's nothing is too soon. I do want to throw a name at you.
Oh,
okay. Can I do that? Can I throw a name?
I mean, by the time the name comes out there, he probably already has another job, but yeah,
probably. How about the name of a Hall of Fame basketball coach?
Jerome Tang.
You got it, maybe. No, it's a name that you all know. He's a college basketball Hall of Famer. He's an active head coach right now. He did lose in the second round, but had a pretty damn good season and kind of a revival of his coaching career of sorts. The name is Pitino. Richard
Stop
Pitino.
it.
New Mexico tournament back-to-back years. They make it to the round of 32 this year. I think that's kind of the mid-major jump. Obviously, the Mountain West has had some great competition the last few years, much like the Big 12. I'm just saying, the name Pitino, it carries a lot, and I think Richard's done a good job over there, better than the Minnesota thing.
Yeah, the Minnesota thing went so poorly that I don't know if I can trust right now Pitino being in West Virginia. I can't get that out of my mind.
That Minnesota plays basketball anymore.
Oh, has anyone won there in a long time? Great hockey school. Great hockey school.
Yeah, they won the Big Ten in like 97.
Yeah, Pitino.
Kevin McHale had a good career there.
And I'm not a buy right now for Pitino. I am a buy from a column at Drake, who it sounds like is going somewhere, probably not West Virginia. By the time this releases, he's probably gone somewhere that's not West Virginia. I want to know for Ren Baker, why haven't you got maybe an assistant on staff, right? That hey, let's keep the shell together, try to limit who transfers out by getting Darian DeVries assistants who want to be a head coach at the Power 4 level. Yes.
And if that is the case, and they pull up an assistant by like Thursday, how does that not piss off the West Virginia fans? How do you say, like, we haven't been in the tournament, it's been a week and a half, and you hired an assistant? That means we struck out on like 5 options, right? Like, wouldn't that be the optics there?
Yes. And that's
I understand what you're saying. It might not be the worst thing in the world, but I'm just saying, like, from a West Virginia fan standpoint, that's not going to make you feel any better about Ren Baker.
No, and I'm not sure the West Virginia fans feel good about anything right now.
Same thing with the UT with Rodney Terry. Is Rodney Terry an option?
Please.
Are we bringing Rodney Terry back to the party, to the Big 12 party?
Anything but that right now.
It's good for content.
The Pitino deal, Richard made me the number one, possibly. McCollum was up there too. I am going to recuse myself entirely from this question. And I want to, before I get into this, say that this rumor has been floated around on social media quite a bit. This has nothing to do with what's on screen. We're going to give it very second. Okay. This rumor has been floated around. We are going to address that rumor. I am completely, again, recusing myself from an opinion here. I'm going to bounce around this one and do not condone any of the actions that resulted in his firing whatsoever.
Okay.
West Virginia fans have thrown out the idea of Bob Huggins. I will give the floor to you.
I'll throw it back at you, the question you can't answer.
Shoot. No.
It's real easy. You should know this. Who is the offensive coordinator at the University of Arkansas?
That would be Bobby Petrino. Thank you. I can answer that without recusing myself.
Time heals all wounds. Have we had enough time? I'll say this.
Oh, shoot. Gosh, Dave. Can I ask you a question? Because, and I'm to cover my bases here for
so that you don't have to answer the question.
What's it called in the court of law when they're typing things up?
Stenography?
Yes, for the stenographer, for the transcript that comes out. The question I have for you, because I don't know the answer, why was Rick Pitino fired from Louisville?
Well, roughly the same reason why Bobby Petrino was fired from Arkansas.
Yeah, in a roundabout way, possibly. I don't know. I'm asking you for clarification, right? And where is Rick Pitino now?
There was a restaurant. There were recruits.
Okay, so
there were dancers.
And why? I don't know the answer to this, so I'm just throwing. Why was Chris Beard fired from Texas?
There was a strike involved. There was some hitting. So in you saying time heals all wounds, in college athletics where money is the number one thing, I will, of your current analysis, agree with that. And I'll say this, like if you're Ren Baker and you're looking at Chris Beard coaching in the Sweet 16, 2.5 years after beating up his girlfriend, his fiance, whatever it was, like
allegedly, by the way, I don't know if we ever really got
charges are dropped. Yeah, that's true. Legal, Locked On's legal team, allegedly. That's why he got fired at Texas. And you're looking at Bob Huggins and you're like, it's still not great and it's not PC, but the guy didn't commit a crime. Like that's what Ren Baker could be thinking right there. You know, it's not great for the optics. I probably wouldn't bring him back, but there's got to be some part of him that's thinking that.
What was the Mike Gundy storyline?
Durant is going to be the opening day starter in center field for the Red Sox this year.
What was the
suspended for it last year for saying that?
The Mike Gundy storyline over the summer.
I've done it 1,000 times.
Right. So there was also that in the situation that we're discussing here.
Yes, there is that as well. It was a double play. It wasn't.
What was that situation? I'm going to leave it to you.
That would be driving under the influence.
Correct. Which is not legal.
Yeah. Not legal. That is true.
So there was a legal issue.
There is a crime committed, I guess, a misdemeanor committed.
Yep.
I always think of it in this kind of sense when we're talking about like a bold hire for an AD, like the optics part of it of like he could go to his fans and his boosters and be like, look, I brought in the right guy. Like Darian DeVries looked like the right guy. He left after a year. I didn't want to go through another scenario where we were doing, the stopgap like we did in 23-24. And I brought back a Hall of Famer who's a West Virginia legend. Like it might still not look good for optics nationwide, but I think there's a section of the fan base and your donors who are like, yeah, Ren, that's a tough situation. I get why you'd bring Bob Huggins back. It wasn't an on-court thing that led us to fire him. He could probably still coach. I still doubt it. I put that at like a 5% chance they hire Bob Huggins, but like there's a way. All I'm saying is there's a way.
May I introduce you to the name Rich Rodriguez? Not that Rich was ever fired.
Right, not shamed. Yeah.
In the hiring old West Virginia coaches.
Could happen.
I want to make it very clear that the opinions expressed by Cameron Stewart do not represent the opinions of the host of Locked On Big 12. And I will.
And he also apparently cannot deem what is legal or illegal.
He cannot. He didn't do anything illegal. He just did what Mike Gundy would do, right? Come on.
Yeah. The other part wasn't illegal. I mean, yeah, illegal on Twitter.
What's that concert happening in Waco here coming up? It's Turnpike, Shane Smith and the Saints, and I think Cross Canadian Ragweed. This has been
all I'm saying.
That part's got to get cut. This has been, and it always will be, Locked
On. Not that I agree with it.
Thank you for making your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.